Hi, welcome to episode 302 of the Corner of Knit and Tea. My name is Laura. I'm also known as Fluffyk on Ravelry, Fluffykira on Twitter. I blog over at thecornerofknitandtea.com, where this episode and every episode's show notes will be. I have an Etsy shop called The Corner of Knit and Tea, where I sell my handspun yarns and my patterns. And we also have a Ravelry group called The Corner of Knit and Tea. Hello, how are you? It is Monday, November 2nd. My brain is addled, and I come to you from outside Kansas City. I hope that you are doing well, that you have had a lovely weekend, and that you are ready to start a week. This is going to be quite the week in the US, and I'm not going to dwell on that, but suffice it to say, I will need my knitting as distraction for this week. This weekend was November 1st, which means we are now into NaKniSweMo, and I have not one but two sweaters on the docket and have them here to show to you. I believe that will be pretty much all you'll be seeing this month because I don't know how I'm going to crank out two sweaters. I have one that is a sample and one for myself, and I'm going to talk about both today. Also, I have one small finish, I have a finished spin, and I have one other little thing on the needles to share with you. So I'm going to start today, before I get into the front end of the podcast, which is tea and knitting, I'm actually going to answer another question from episode 300, and I have done some prep for this. I was asked if I could share more about patterns that are good for handspun yarns. So I went ahead and did just a quick toss of my drawers to see what I had that I could bring. This is by no means exhaustive, and there are other patterns. If you are interested in seeing what I have knit from handspun, I do have a tab on my project page called handspun, and I believe you'll be able to get there to see it. This is on Ravelry, of course, and so you can see what projects I've actually done in my handspun. In general, projects that I do in handspun are projects that are on the simpler side. I find that handspun, unless it's in a solid color, can be fairly busy, and so picking up a pattern that has quite a bit of visual interest in terms of lace or other patterns or textures can be difficult to sort of make both the handspun and the pattern shine. The handspun kind of distracts from the pattern, and sometimes it feels like, why put in all this work? So I will say that a lot of the patterns that I attempt in handspun are simpler, meaning garter stitch. Garter stitch is beautiful in handspun. Stockinette is fine. Some simple shaping or eyelets or those kinds of things are fine. Those will carry through. It just depends. I find that patterns that call for gradients are great. Any pattern that calls for spin cycle yarns, you could certainly substitute handspun in there because spin cycle is made to look like handspun. So in particular, I'm thinking of the any of the shift patterns by Andrea Mowry, Night Shift, the shifty sweater, the shifty hat, any of those kinds of things you could definitely substitute handspun in. And again, like I said, plain patterns, anything for plain mitts, hats, all kinds of things. So handspun is really good for anything and everything. And so I'm just going to show you a few of the things that I have made in my time. One of the few sweaters that I've made, I made one other one that I can think of, but I think this is the only one that I really, really wear. This is called the Moxie Pullover. It is by Amy Christophers, and the pattern calls for a worsted weight yarn. It does not call for handspun, and I actually admit that a lot of the patterns I have come to via handspun are because I have seen someone else do it. In this case, it was a user on Ravelry by the name of Bean, and she did, Irene did her sweater in handspun, and I thought it looked great and decided to do mine. The fiber that I spun for this is Hello Yarn. It was I believe, mixed merino and silk, so it had dark streaks in it, and it was called Waterweed. And I spun up and knit this sweater in handspun. So again, that is the Moxie Pullover by Amy Christophers. So that's if you've got a lot of hand spinning in mind. I actually had one skein of this left over. I spun up too much, and I knit up a cowl called Foolproof by Louise Zass Bingham, and it is a cowl that is knit on the bias, and I can't take credit for that one either. I don't know if it was Adrienne of Hello Yarn who knit the first one, but someone in it was either her or someone in her group knit one of those cowls, and it was not designed to be knit in handspun, but it is a garter stitch cowl knit on the bias, and it's got a few interesting tricks so that it's kind of knit all in one piece. And there isn't even any grafting, which is amazing. You sort of start by casting on a couple stitches and you finish by binding off a couple stitches. And it's a great pattern. And if you look in the projects under the Foolproof Cowl, you will find quite a few in handspun because it kind of went raging through the Hello Yarn group, and we all sort of copied each other, as it were. So there is, I don't have that cowl to show you because actually I gave that to my sister because she left the colors of this sweater, and so I made her the cowl with the leftovers. Again, if you're looking for something that doesn't take quite as much handspun, I don't know if you're spinners or if you're buying handspun, I have done a ton of shawls in handspun in varieties. So this was a shawl that I did several years ago in yarn that I spun as a singles. So basically I took the fiber that I got and spun it as a singles yarn, spun it all the way through, and I cannot remember what the name of the fiber was, but the shawl, I've written notes, the shawl is the Beach Cove shawl by Anne Podlesak. And this is a simple triangular shawl with some stockinette, some eyelet, and some garter ridges. And so again, the beauty of the handspun shines through, and it isn't distracted, but it's also got a little something in there, including the yarn over spine, that gives it something a little fun to look at. And then at the bottom, there is a bit more of a lace pattern. So, you know, you can take pretty much any shawl and turn it into handspun, but and adapt it to be used with handspun. But again, the simple patterns let the handspun yarn shine. So, speaking of more simple shawls, this again was not an idea that I started with. I got this from watching Amy of The Fat Squirrel Speaks, Amy Beth, and she was knitting this gorgeous shawl. It is called Canyonlands, and it is by Nim Teasdale, and I just spun up some yarn that I really wanted to use for it and continued knitting. And again, this is a garter stitch. It's got some yarn overs, it's got some bias knitting and kind of a little bit of chevron-y sections, but it's super simple, which means that the yarn gets to do all of the work. So, and this, I think I knit 2 skeins of yarn with this one, and I was really, really happy with the way it came out. It's kind of like a muted rainbow, and I just really, really love that. And again, nothing special about it, just a garter stitch shawl with some lines, and while Nim Teasdale has some really amazing intricate patterns, she also has a few that are simple. Another inspiration is Stephen West. Stephen West does a ton of garter stitch shawls that he does in fades, and a lot of them have interesting shaping, but there's nothing about them that makes them, there's nothing about them that is so patterned that it makes it difficult to use for handspun. So for instance, I knit a dotted raise, and I'm sure I was not the first one to do this. I can't remember. I think it might have been Amy Beth from The Fat Squirrel, and this one, again, I spun a singles yarn for this one. You can use singles or plied. The Nim Teasdale, the Canyonlands, that was plied yarn. So that was not singles, but this is singles, and I knit this one. This is Dotted Rays by Stephen West, and again, you just follow the pattern and let the yarn do all the work. So, and short row shaping means that your colors come out in interesting patterns, and of course, if you are learning how to spin or intentionally spinning for some of these projects is a completely different way of thinking, and for the most of them I did not intentionally spin. Like on this one, I just loved this braid. This was a braid from Julie Spins, and it was an oversized braid, and I decided I wanted to spin it into singles and turn it into a shawl. And then I saw someone do the dotted rays. I think it was Amy Beth, as I said, and I was like, great, that's what I want to do. And this I actually took with me to Ireland a couple years ago and knit it while I was there. So again, those are for varying lengths of handspun. The other thing you can do is if you have little bits of handspun, you can pair them with a commercial yarn and just take a simple pattern. This is a pattern called 50 Shades of Any Color, and it was a knit along from Stitch Nerd Designs, who is Susan Ashcroft, and she has a number of patterns that would work really well for handspun. She is the one who also did the Quaker Yarn Stretcher, which is a pattern that can basically be knit with however much yardage you have. She has several patterns that are you know, basically garter stitch shawls for whatever you have, and so you can use them with your handspun. This was called 50 Shades of Any Color, and I had some handspun that I wanted to use in 2 flavors, 2 different skeins of yarn, and so what I did is I ordered a skein of Madeline Tosh Pashmina, and that is the body of the shawl, and then for the edging I went ahead and used 2 sets of handspun. One was some from a dyer called Maud Me, who is no longer dyeing. She was living in New Zealand at the time. And then one is a small bump of a really luxurious fiber that I received. I believe it was like BFL and yak, and it was super soft, but I didn't have a ton of it because I think I only got about 2 ounces. So I ended up combining them. So you can see the paler blue, kind of variegated, is the Maud and Me, and then I used just a few accents of the BFL and yak that I spun in kind of a gorgeous dark teal. So again, you can use what you have and take patterns and just sort of adapt them to that. Now there are a million hat and mitten patterns or fingerless mitts. There is a wonderful pair of fingerless mitts, and I cannot remember the name of the pattern, but the pattern designer is Karen Everett, and they are super cozy. They've got like flip top. They're not completely mittens. They are fingerless mitts, but they've got really long sections of ribbing at the top that you can fold over, and those are really great. I think there is a pattern by you know what? There are so many, I can't even tell you all of them. But again, look for things that are simple. Look for either small amounts in accessories. A skein of handspun is great for a hat. You really don't need too much, 150 to 200 yards. So those are a few of the handspun patterns I've found along the way. And of course, I will continue to, I'm sure, find items and then knit more items. And again, you can check my project page and the handspun category on Ravelry if you are interested in seeing more. So that is kind of that question done and dusted, and now let's move into 12 minutes in, let's move into the podcast. So today I'm drinking a new to me tea. I was watching another podcaster, The Corner of Craft. She is primarily a crocheter, although she does knit, and she also dyes a line of yarn that is inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. So she promoted Ferdin Blend, and I've seen quite a few people talk about Ferdin Blend. They are a tea maker in the UK, and I decided to place an order. And one of the things that I got in my order, because I was eager to celebrate the holidays, or at least the tastes of the holidays, is I got a gingerbread chai tea. So this is from Ferdin Blend, and it is rooibos, cardamom, cinnamon, ginger, mallow flavors, and mallow flowers and other flavors. And actually it's kind of interesting because I am not that interested in rooibos, so I guess I didn't pay attention to that, but I made it up today and I'm going to try it. So that is ginger chai, and actually it even came with instructions on, you know, that may have been an extra sample they included. I may not have ordered that one, because primarily what I have been ordering lately is decaf teas, because I have a ton of regular teas, but I do not have that many decaf teas, and I have been having a cup of tea in the evening before going to bed. So I think I ordered fruit blends and they sent me this one, which would explain why it's rooibos, because that's not usually my favorite, but I'm going to try it anyway, and I have it in my Downton Abbey mug, and it came with a recipe on how to make a ginger chai latte. I chose not to do that today, but that's what I've got. That's pretty good. It's definitely spicy. I taste the cardamom and maybe a little bit of the ginger, and it almost tastes like a little peppery in the back of my throat. But it actually is quite good. Generally, I just don't care for rooibos flavoring, but this is not bad. Anyway, I am eager to try more from Ferdin Blend, and I will share those with you over the next few weeks as I do. So let's head over to the knitting section. So I have one finished object this week, and that is a rainbow hat for Miles. I showed you this yarn a while ago. This has a whole story to it that I won't repeat. You've heard me talk about it before. The yarn is from White Birch Yarns, which, or it might be White Birch Fiber Arts. I can't remember. It is the colorway the Full Monty, and this is the sock base. I previously knit with it on the DK base, and you might notice that I held it double. I started to knit with it as a single, and I just decided that I didn't want to knit a sock yarn weight hat, so I held it double with some white that I had in stash. I think it might be Cascade Heritage, I'm not sure. And what I did is I used the Barley Hat by Tin Can Knits sort of as a model. I did not do the garter stitch section, but I did the 2x2 rib and the rest of the hat, and then I did the pom-pom, and the pom-pom came out kind of cool because of the way the yarn stripes. I got all the colors in there, but it came out kind of cool looking. So this hat is finished, and I'm hoping he will like it, even though it is not the same hat as last time. This was a hat that I knit for Roxy, and Miles inherited it, and he loved it to death, and actually not to death. The hat still stands, but his head is too big for the hat now, and he's been very upset about it, and so I went ahead and tried to procure the same yarn, could not procure it in the same weight. The part that I used for the brim was a completely different yarn way back when, so this is kind of a similar hat, but not quite the same, but hopefully it will be okay with him. So that is what I finished this week. I also cast on one more thing kind of on my Christmas gift list. I talked to you about how Miles needed one more pair of socks. I was trying to figure out what sock yarn I was going to use, and then I realized I already had some wound up. I had, well, actually, I think I did end up winding this because the ball fell apart, but I have some crazy Zauber ball that I bought a while ago. I can't even remember what the colorway is of this. It's some neutrals and then kind of a dark foresty greeny teal, which I really like. I know that I used it to knit a little accessory way back when, so it was missing a little bit, and I think I used it. I think the reason it is wound this way is because I used it to knit a couple squares in my mom's Cozy Memories blanket like this one, and I held the yarn double, so I think I wound it into a cake from the Zauber ball so that I could get both ends, because I can see both ends, so I think I was holding it doubled. However, I decided it would be some nice kind of neutral sock yarn to knit Miles a pair of socks. I needed to knit him one more pair of socks, and I have a half a pair. I have the first sock complete. This is just a plain sock. I actually could have done the cuff a little bit longer. I probably should have, but I didn't. And it's just a plain sock with a 2x2 rib at top, a slip stitch heel flap with gusset, and then down to a standard toe. And so I just need to cast on and knit the second sock. I knit the entire first sock this week. It was pretty easy. And I, although I have 2 sweaters to tackle this month, I should be able to finish this one because I can use this during roundy knitting. Both of my sweaters are charted to begin with. One continues to be charted because it's got a pattern stitch. The other will just be stockinette in the round by the time I finish the chart. But so I have a roundy project to do in case of, you know, I need to run out or sit on a meeting or something and I can't concentrate. So that's the first sock, and hopefully the second sock will be done next week or the week after. That leaves me with 1 pair of mittens and 1 more gift to knit after that. So my plan is to hopefully finish Miles' socks this month and maybe finish Roxy's mittens this month. That gives me the first couple weeks of December to crank out that final gift, which is something for my brother-in-law, and I need to kind of press my sister on that because I don't know what yet, and if I'm going to knit him socks, he is 6 foot tall, so I need to get started on those. So that's what's going on there. Now let's talk about November's main event, which, as you know, is always NaKniSweMo, National Knit a Sweater Month. I have expanded on this in previous episodes. If you are interested in joining us, you can check out the hashtag NaKniSweMo on Instagram, or you can head on over to the NaKniSweMo Ravelry group, where we have a large group of knitters working on sweaters. So the challenge is to knit a sweater in the month of November that is 50,000 stitches, cast on November 1st, cast off on November 30th, and complete an entire sweater. Basically, because of the way things worked out, I am doing 2 sweaters this month. I do not necessarily anticipate I will finish both. I will finish one of them because it is a sample, and the other one I want to knit for me, and I'm excited about it, so hopefully I will get it done, but if not, I will finish it in December. So let's talk about those 2 sweaters. The first sweater is a sample for Zen Yarn Garden, and it is a pattern by Joji Locatelli. It was designed for Malabrigo yarn, and it is in one of their Malabrigo yarn booklets. I think it's book 6. I had linked it in last week's show notes. And the pattern is Majuga, M-A-J-U-G-A, and it is a textured pattern. As you can see from my swatch, it is an all-over textured pattern. The sweater that the sample in the Malabrigo book was knit in a variegated yarn, but Zen Yarn Garden asked me to knit it in one of their, this is a, I wouldn't even call it a semi-solid, it's really, well, okay, it's a semi-solid in the sense that it's got a few different tones in it, but it doesn't even have, like, different shades, it's just different, so you can see there is a little bit of variation, and we thought that would look really, really nice with the textured stitch pattern. So this is my tiny little swatch that I did. Yes, it's not 4x4 or 6x6, but this is my tiny little swatch. I got the measurements I needed, and I cast on. And so last night I did the first 16 rows, and got myself started. The pattern is a top-down raglan sweater, so it is a v-neck cardigan, so it is knit back and forth, and I'm not going to give you too many more details than that, but suffice it to say, I have started, I am in the raglan increases, and you can start to see the pattern. It's not a ton of work, but I basically did the first chart repeat, and now I need to do a few more. I hope that by the time I come back next week, maybe I will have finished the yoke, and will be working on the body. Basically, like I said, it's worked top down. Eventually I will separate for the sleeves, pull the sleeves off, and then go ahead and work on the body. So in order to make this happen this month, I hope that by next time I am working on the body. Like I said, I have a few more repeats of the chart to do, and then some final shaping, and then we will move on. But that's not bad for the first day. That ended up being about 1,900 stitches. I am tracking my stitch count on an Excel spreadsheet because I am nerdy like that. So that was the first, and I am alternating skeins. The yarn that I'm using is Zen Yarn Garden Superfine DK. The pattern calls for Malabrigo Rios, which is a worsted weight. The Zen Yarn Garden worsted weight is actually a little bit more Aran, so the DK weight knits up better at the gauge suggested, and so this is the colorway Silver Moon, and as I said, it's just kind of a really pretty pale silver with some lights and darks, very semi-solid. It should be lovely, and there are some variations in the skeins that I have noticed, so I am definitely alternating skeins. I had a massive winding party on Saturday where I set up my yarn Swift and ball winder and wound like 10 skeins of yarn, and my arms were tired afterwards, but I did notice, particularly as I wound these up, these are kettle dyed in small batches, and so I am sure that they were in slightly different places in the pot, and they obviously all belong to the same set. They were dyed together, but just another, definitely alternate your yarns. So that is what I'm doing here, and it's pretty easy because since this is a raglan and we're going, it's a top-down raglan and we're going back and forth, I just alternate every 2 rows. So that is the start on Majuga, and you will be seeing that lots more this month because this one definitely has to get done. So the second sweater that I cast on is one for me, and it is sort of an impulse buy, impulse cast on a little bit, if you can count like around a month as an impulse. As soon, back when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died feels like a few years ago, a few months ago, it's really like a month ago. I decided sort of impulsively that I wanted to cast on for one of the descent projects that uses a colorwork chart to sort of chart her descent cowl. And I decided that what I wanted to knit was the Descent Pullover, which is a fingering weight yarn pattern by Andrea Rangel. And so I purchased the pattern, and then I impulse bought sweater yarn that I had been itching to try, which is BarterWulco Wisconsin Woolen Spun. This is Susan B. Anderson's company and yarn that she mills in small batches. And the Wisconsin Woolen Spun is woolen spun in a fingering weight. It's got great yardage. I have been wanting to try a woolen spun sweater because it will be lighter weight than a lot of the worsted sweaters that I knit, and I wanted to see how I felt about that. In general, woolen spun yarns, well, I shouldn't say they are rougher. A lot of the woolen spun yarns on the market are a little bit more rustic. They come with a little bit of vegetable matter in them. They are very minimally processed. And I am surprised and pleased that this is super soft. I think it will not even be a problem for next to the skin wear, which is wonderful. Even though it is a pullover and I probably will wear something underneath, it's nice to know that the yarn is soft enough for next to the skin wear. I won't say it's merino soft, but it is really lovely. So I ordered 2 colorways from BarterWulco, and these are the Wild Plum and the Oats colorway. So the main color of the cardigan is going to be purple, and the color work is going to be done in the Oats colorway. So that's what I've got. I did a really tiny minimal swatch. Again, please do not as I do as I say, which is swatch so you get a good idea of what you're doing. The pattern had quite a few recommendations for how to swatch, one of which was that you really needed to swatch in the round because you are knitting, the pullover is knit in the round. Obviously, if you wanted to make a cardigan, you could steek it. I decided not to do that, but you would want to knit the color work in the round so you do not have to do color work on the purl side. So I sort of did a cheater. I don't know if you've seen this. A lot of people do cheating swatches where you knit across, and rather than actually knitting a swatch that is big enough to fully knit in the round, although I have done that as well, you can do that on double points. What they do is they knit a swatch and you just carry your yarn around the back to the beginning, you slide it to the other end of the needle and start again, and so you end up with a swatch with a bunch of yarn loops on the back, and then when you're done, you just cut the yarn loops open so it can lay flat. So this is my tiny little swatch. It got what I needed out of it. Again, do as I say, not as I do. This is probably not, it's certainly not enough because of the way it curls. I should have done more in the solid color, and I also should have knit it for longer so that I could lay it out and see. This is a swatch with using the needles called for in the pattern. I did not even get close to gauge. But I really did, I should say gauge for the pattern, I believe was either 7.25 or 7.5 stitches to the inch. I got about 6 stitches to the inch, which again, not even close. And I actually really liked the fabric that I created, however, so I am going to knit my sweater at this gauge, and as a result, I am knitting the small or extra small size, and I'm hoping that it comes out okay. I play a little faster and looser with my own sweaters. For Mayuga, I knit the swatch, I got what I needed from it, and then I moved ahead to start knitting. This one, I probably could have stood to have done another swatch. I ended up, like I said, going with this gauge because I liked the fabric that it created, and so I have started my sweater. So last night I cast on, and I spent quite a bit of time, and fingering weight produces a lot of stitches and not a ton of fabric. So last night what I did was I cast on and I did basically all of the beginnings of the yoke. So I knit the ribbing at the collar, and then there is some shorter shaping to create a little bit of length in the back so that the sweater sits up, covers kind of your shoulders, and also sits a little bit lower in the front. This is a technique that is used quite a bit in sweater patterns. And then I did the first couple rows of the chart, which are fairly solid. It's just that little polka dot of white in there. And then I finished out all of the solid rows. So I'm basically ready to start the part in the chart where we're going to have increases and more intense color work that's going to look more like this. So that is what I am going to start tonight. And like I said, that fingering weight yarn, she takes a lot of stitches because I am already 3,400 stitches into this sweater. So that was a total of 5,000 stitches yesterday. It was a lot. I did knit all day, but I'm really pleased with it. And my hope is that I can continue to put in a few thousand stitches on each sweater each night. Like I said, I am sure I can finish my Yuga, and I will be being sure to put in at least 2,000 stitches a night on that, because I really do need to, I want to get that done and out, not the least of which is because I get paid, but also so she can start selling kits for that, and I will work on my own as time allows. This is one where the next, I believe the chart is about 44 rows, and I knit maybe 5 or 6 rows last night. So I have about 40 rows of chart. I expect that those will take me a few nights because it's intense color work and a lot of increasing. And then as soon as that's done, the rest of the sweater is in stockinette. So there is some minimal shaping, but otherwise it is basically just knit round and round and round and round and round. BarterWulco, I also will begin. Okay, so I only have one skein of the contrasting color, so that one I will obviously not be alternating. And I opted, because it is color work and it is in the round, I opted not to alternate my skeins in the yoke. I don't think that will be a problem because I think there will be enough visual distraction in the yoke with the color work that even if there were a slight variation between what's in the yoke and some of the other skeins that I put into the sweater, I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. And so my plan is to start alternating skeins of the purple once I actually finish the yoke. And potentially even once I separate for the sleeves, and then I will just alternate on the body and the sleeves as I continue through. I really don't think, the skeins that I got were all the same dye lot, and I should say that I received excellent customer service at BarterWulco. Because when I ordered 4 skeins, and it was the last 4 skeins they had in stock, and they were not of the same dye lot. And the person who went to package up my order, which I actually believe is Susan Anderson's son, emailed me and said, hey, these are not from the same dye lot, and there is a pretty noticeable difference. Are you using these for the same project? Which I totally appreciate. I love. I thought that was fabulous customer service. And he said we have a couple options. One is I can check the warehouse and see if we have 4 skeins that are all of one dye lot. Or I can offer you whatever other color you might want, or we can refund your offer, which I thought was absolutely A+ customer service. At that point, I kind of had my heart set on the purple, and there weren't other colorways in stock that I really wanted. So I said, you know, my heart is set on the purple. Would you check the warehouse? And if you don't find anything in the warehouse, I guess I'll just take a refund, but I really appreciate you're making the effort. And they checked the warehouse, and they had 4 in the warehouse of the same dye lot. So I do know that my yarns came from the same dye lot, but again, because it is dyed in small batches, I do want to be sure that I alternate the skeins. These skeins actually don't look any different, but I don't want any unsightly lines in a sweater that I'm going to spend this much time on. So like I said, I probably will not alternate during the color work section, but then as soon as I get to the body and where I have a big solid section, I will work on those. So that is my second sweater for the month, and as you're seeing me on November 2nd, I've only gotten 1 day of work in so far on those because I've been working on the day job so far today. I will work on these later this evening. So that is what I have going on there. Finally, I want to talk about a pattern that I'm going to be releasing later this week. I am releasing a new cowl pattern, and it is called Consequential. And the name came to me both because of the design and then also because of the yarn that I'm using. I have showed you over the last few weeks the cowls that I have created using Monostel Uruguay Yarns Allegria. And so to begin with, my inspiration for the pattern was an episode of the Fruity Knitting podcast that I watched with Cecilia Campocharo, who is doing a lot of work with sequence knitting. And she has a book on sequence knitting, and she has tons of patterns in sequence knitting. And I decided that I wanted to give sequence knitting a try. And the basis behind sequence knitting is that you are repeating a pattern throughout a project, and no matter how many rows or rounds that you are completing, you are still completing the same pattern. So with the exception of 2 stitches, this entire cowl is a knit 2, purl 2 sequence. And what you do is you make a slight variation in the stitch count. That's what I said, the 2 stitches. You make a slight variation in stitch count, and as you do that, your stitches travel, which creates these really nice lines. So I decided to design both a cowl and an eternity loop. And the cowl is in Alegria Grande from Monostil Uruguay in the colorway Leo. And so again, it's 22 inches in the round circumference. It is approximately between 9 and 10 inches tall. And I knit this using almost the full skein and then gave it a gentle block, a steam block, and it is a warm, cozy cowl. The complement to that is basically the same pattern, but as an eternity loop. So the eternity loop is 44 inches in the round. It is the almost exact same pattern, other than the fact that you cast on for different numbers. And it is knit in the Ushuaia colorway. And this almost looks like the Milky Way with speckles of white, lavender, and a kind of mustardy orange that looks quite a bit like Leo. It is the same colorway, I believe. And so these I designed together. And the pattern name is Consequential. And the reason I called it Consequential was because of, first, it is sequence knitting, and second, I love what Monostil Uruguay does. Monostil Uruguay is a collective founded in Uruguay to support local artisans and help women and their families in Uruguay. Each skein of yarn comes with the dyer's name on it, so you know who handled your yarn and who helped produce your yarn. And Monostil Uruguay is a member of the World Fair Trade certification, or they are World Fair Trade certified, which means they are committed to the highest levels of ethical conduct. They return money to schools in Uruguay and help support the families in Uruguay. And I really believe that the work they are doing is of consequence. So sequence and of consequence became consequential. So that is the name of this cowl. As I said, it will be releasing on Wednesday. And I will have information on my Instagram and Facebook and Ravelry profiles, and there will be a coupon code for the first week and a half or so. So keep an eye on my Instagram feed. I am putting the finishing touches on the pattern as we speak, and so within the next couple of days, this will be live and available for purchase. As I said, the cowl takes 1 skein, or maybe I didn't say, the cowl takes 1 skein, which is a skein of 100 grams and 180 yards, and then the eternity loop takes 2 skeins, and of course you can use any worsted weight yarn that you have in stash if you would like, but Monostil Uruguay generously sent me the skeins of Ushuaia for review. Alegria Grande is a soft, squishy, 100% superwash merino yarn that comes in amazing colorways. I love the way they dye their yarns. And there are semi-solids as well as speckles. It is machine washable and dryable. So if you want to use this yarn for kids knits or easy care sweaters or accessories, they are wonderful for that. Again, like I said, I went ahead and steam blocked these. Normally I would probably soak them in wool wash and lay flat to dry, but they are machine washable and dryable. So I want to give out a really great thanks to Monostil Uruguay and all my inspiration, and thanks to you for listening to me talk about these for a while, and hopefully for supporting me. So that is coming this Wednesday. Whew, this is a long podcast, so I will just show you one final thing that I did this week. I finished spinning that yarn that I showed you, the fiber that I showed you last week. The fiber was called How Ghastly, and it was a special order that Hello Yarn did a while back. It was on Rambouillet, which is soft and squishy, and I spun it up, and like I said, it's kind of a muted rainbow. I ended up doing a fractal spin where I spun half of the fiber in short color repeats and half of the fiber in longer color repeats, and so that creates sections where the colors come together. So you have multiple strands of the same colorway in there, but it also creates those great barber pole stripes. Unfortunately, someone already saw this on my Instagram and snagged it, so I'm going to be working on the second skein and getting these out to her. This week I am taking a break and I am spinning the Rambouillet fiber from my prize draw. The winner asked for it to be spun, so I should have that to show you next week, and then that will go out to her. So that is my spinning plans, and the rest of the month is just going to be a whole lot of NaKniSweMo. So if you are knitting sweaters this month, regardless of whether you are participating in NaKniSweMo or not, I would love to see what you are making. This week, I wish you, if you are in the US, much peace, and try and turn away from the news for a little bit. And we've done everything. Well, okay, I should say, if you haven't voted, go vote. If you have voted, we've done everything we can, and we just have to cross our fingers and hope everything turns out as it should be. So I wish you much peace this week. I hope you find joy in your crafting. And until I see you next time, I will say happy knitting, happy spinning, happy sipping, and I'll see you next time. Bye.